Thank you, Brett. Kia ora everyone. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Ko Wendy Ewens, toka ingoa. I am so pleased to be talking with you all today about building your association's brand voice. So a little bit about me. I'm a strategy and accessibility consultant. I work with organisations to develop and refine strategic plans, build leadership capability and team culture. I've been in the consulting world for about 3.5 years. So prior to that, I was the founding chief executive of a not-for-profit accessibility organisation called ABLE. I led the organisation for 10 years. And I'm also an experienced board trustee and director. So through my work as a consultant and at ABLE and also working with boards, I've got quite a lot of experience with looking at brand voice and I guess developing a voice for your organisation. So today I'm going to be talking about how you build your association's brand voice and how you express it. So I'm not coming at the topic from a typical marketing perspective. I'm sort of a jack of all trades. So I will be talking to this really from my own experiences. And, you know, as part of my role at Able and building that organization, I had to develop and evolve a brand voice for Able that actually was quite successful, but was a steep learning curve with lots of hits and misses. And also a lot of the work that I do as a consultant is with organizations where there's some kind of disconnect. So what they do doesn't always match what they say. So part of my role is helping bring that into line and bring clarity to what an organization's purpose and voice actually is. So I'm going to take you through some slides and just some ideas and stories from my own experiences, but do encourage you to just indicate if you've got a question or there's something you want to dive into a little bit further. Very happy to do that during this part of the presentation. But as Brett said, afterwards we'll also have a chance for a more open conversation as well. So why does brand voice matter? So your brand voice is your association's personality and presence. So it's how you communicate internally and externally. And, you know, voice shapes trust and connection and engagement. And we know that people join people. So they don't join logos, they join people. So that voice is really important. And it's the first thing people see when they come into contact with your association. So it's not just marketing jargon to talk about brand voice. It's about authenticity, it's about community, and it's about how your kaupapa comes through in everything that you do. So I'm going to give a few examples of how brand voice has gone well or not well for organisations that I have been involved with. So there's an organisation I've been working with over the last couple of years who have got a really strong brand voice. And I think that's because of a few reasons. So number one is they had a really strong brand concept to start with. So they had a strong logo. They really knew their values, so what they were about. They had really strong imagery. Even the name of the organisation, the website, that brand voice carried through everything that they did. But also their brand voice really filtered down from the top. So the leaders of that organisation absolutely knew that what that brand voice was and were able to share that with everyone in their team. So then that brand voice was reflected back up so that if anybody got off track, it was being reflected all around the organisation. So everybody knew that brand voice. And it was from the actual office space they had to the pens that they used to the way that they communicated internally and externally. They also constantly reviewed their brand voice and refined it and kept it alive and current. And they weren't afraid to make changes when they needed to make sure that brand voice stayed really relevant. And they also tailored their brand voice to their audience. So whether that was when talking to customers or stakeholders or government, but there were some consistent strands through that brand voice. So it might change slightly depending on your audience, but there's a consistency there that's really important. Um, so, you might be thinking about brand voice in your own association and thinking, well, isn't it just organic? We know what we're about. So, isn't it just an organic thing that kind of happens? Um, and, I think to some extent that can be true, but it can lead to problems if you go off track a bit. And the reason you can go off track is because you haven't actually defined what that brand voice is. You've just sort of said, okay, it's organic. Everybody that works here sort of knows what our brand voice is. We don't even need to write it down or explicitly say it. But that sort of leaves the door open for perhaps new people or perhaps volunteers, maybe people that haven't been involved with the organisation for long, to sort of maybe get slightly off track, and then your brand voice starts to get fragmented and isn't as clear anymore. So I'm going to share a story about a time where my organisation got it slightly wrong, and what we did to rectify it. So when I was at Able, one of the challenges we had was we just didn't have a lot of capacity in the comms and marketing space. So I was the chief executive. I was also the head of comms, head of marketing. I had some great people looking after operations and administration and finance and production work, but marketing and comms sort of fell on my lap, and I would sometimes use external consultants or companies to do specific projects for us, but actually the day-to-day comms work fell to me. And so we didn't always have a lot of capacity to actually generate our own content to put out there on social media, on our website, on our blog, wherever we wanted to put content. And we were looking at how we advertised to our audience and how we shared our services. And we had access to some television industry media advertising about upcoming TV programs. So part of our work was making TV programs accessible, and the TV broadcasters would share with us these listings, which were very slick. They had slick imagery, they had great text, and we were very much encouraged to sort of share those because, of course, it's advertising for the TV broadcasters. But also we felt, well, let's advertise this to our audience because this is some ready-made content and imagery for us. That's great. So we started doing that. We had some team members who were responsible for sharing that information, and it gave them a bit of a break from generating content, and it also gave them a bit of structure to what they were doing. So they were very happily sharing all of this content. The problem with it is that it saturated our audience. So 80% of our social media content was now these posts, which meant that when we did generate some original content that was directly relevant to our audience, it was a bit jarring and it didn't always cut through because people were sort of almost sick of seeing these things from us and thought they knew what to expect from us. We really diluted our brand voice by having things that weren't in our voice out there. So that sort of did become clear to us over time. And we decided that we really needed a more consistent and a stronger brand voice. So as part of that, we actually made a list of things that we do and things that we don't do. And one of those was that we don't pass through others' content. So we give everything our own voice, and we make sure that it's totally relevant to our audience and to their needs. So that sort of brought us back into line with our brand voice, if you like. So it can be trial and error, figuring out what your brand voice is. But I think considering that everything that comes under your name, however it reaches your members or your audience, people don't think about where that's coming from. If it's coming from your brand, it's coming from you. So just be really conscious of that. So I'm going to just dive into some pillars. So the 4 PO of brand voice. So think of your brand voice as being held up by 4 pillars that each give strength and structure to your brand. So these are sort of the factors that make up your brand. things that after this session you can go away and really think about how they apply to your association. So, po whakaaro, your purpose, that's your kaupapa, that's what drives your mahi. Why are you doing what you're doing? Who are you doing it for? What difference do you make? And what's the point of your association? Po tangata, your tone and your human qualities, so your personality. Who are you? Who are your people? Um, are you professional? Are you a fierce advocate? Are you a warm supporter? What role are you playing for your members? And how does that influence your voice? Po kōrero, so consistency. The same voice across all channels, volunteers, events. So consistency is absolutely key. If you've got a head office that is singing from one songbook, but your volunteers are singing from another, or perhaps your website has been created by someone else on your behalf, but they don't quite have your brand voice down, then you might have a lack of consistency across all of your external channels. And po tūturu, so authenticity, staying true to your people and your purpose. So really thinking about what are those factors and pillars for your organization. So actions speak louder than words. Brand voice, it's not just what's written on your website, it's how your organization shows up in every interaction that you have. So your brand voice lives through how you welcome people at events, how you reply to member emails, how you tell stories about your community, how your processes speak on your behalf. When people attend an event for your association, do they feel seen and included? Do they feel like they understand what they're there for and what they're bringing to the event? When you're replying to member emails, are you friendly and approachable, or are you formal? There's no real right and wrong way to be. Apart from sort of the obvious in terms of you're always going to be open and professional, but it's thinking about what's the brand voice for your association, and then how do you tell stories about your community? So do you celebrate your members' wins, and do you use language that reflects who they are? And even your processes speak on your behalf. So the forms that people fill out, your automatic messages, your reminders for renewal, they all carry some kind of tone and intent. So every touch point that somebody has with your association communicates your values, whether you realize it or not. And the aim is really to make sure that tone and experience reflect your kaupapa and the kind of relationship that you want with your members. So, when people interact with your association, they should really feel your brand, not just read it. And it should just flow through everything that you sort of that you do. So I just want to share a couple of examples of some strong brand voices. So two iconic Kiwi brands that live their voice at every level. So Air New Zealand, what is their brand voice? I'm sure you've got different ideas, coming into your mind now, but in my view, their tone, it's unmistakably Kiwi. It's friendly, it's witty, it's inclusive, can be a bit cheeky sometimes, yet it's always professional. And where are the places that you see that brand voice? It's not just their social media or the emails they send. It's their safety videos, it's their in-flight announcements, and they're always doing that balance of humour with care. So also their email and their web copy do sound quite conversational. They're not just corporate. They really work work hard to do that. And I mean, they have obviously a huge marketing team behind them to do that. But we can take some learnings from these big examples and apply them to our own situations. And then also that, for Air New Zealand, their staff interactions in airports and on board sort of reflect that same authenticity and really follow that brand. So what that really means is their voice and the experience that you have are aligned. So everything they do sort of says we're here to take care of you, and we don't take ourselves too seriously. So that brand voice is quite alive, and we see it at every step of the interaction, except maybe when we're paying the prices for our domestic flights. So Whitaker's, everybody loves chocolate. It's not a hard brand to sell, but actually they've got quite a specific brand which they work very hard to cultivate. So there's a really consistent tone for Whitaker's of craft. So crafting beautiful chocolate, of family, and of pride in what they do. And it's quite that brand comes across as quite genuine, not flashy. And so we actually see that brand right across everything that they do. So on the back of the packaging are, pictures of the family behind Whitaker's. We see it in their ads, which are always very wholesome, very sort of values driven. We see it in their social media posts, and we also see it in what they actually do. So, Whitaker's do quite a few collaborations with other brands, but they always collaborate with brands that align really well with them. So, they did a collaboration with Pix peanut butter brand, which is very similar in terms of being a family driven sort of wholesome kind of brand. So no matter what they do, it still feels quite Kiwi. It feels quite hands on. And so a strong brand voice can be warm and it can be human without being over the top. Um, and you can really sort of feel that integrity in how they communicate. Um, so I think both Air New Zealand and Whitaker's really show what happens when tone, purpose, and action all align. Um, people don't just recognize those brands, they actually trust them. Um, and so the takeaway really for your own associations is that your voice should reflect your purpose and that people should experience your brand voice at every touch point, from emails to events to visiting your website to talking to one of your staff. And so just, really thinking about how you can make that brand voice flow through everything that you do. So in terms of actually creating your brand voice, if you haven't done that already, I wanted to just talk about the role of AI. So some of you may be quite experienced with using AI. Some of you may not have experimented with it in this kind of way, but I did just want to touch on it because it can be a really great tool for marketing and communications. But you've just got to remember that it's not your voice. And if we all rely on AI to be our voice, then we'll have this sort of homogenous kind of voice out there where no one is different from anyone else, and organizations will all sort of sound the same. And it's already happening if you scroll through your LinkedIn feed or even looking at news media. We're getting a lot of that very similar sounding stuff coming through because AI is so much more prevalent. So would really encourage you when you're using AI to make sure that you are really keeping that human element. So, use AI to brainstorm, use it to refine your tone and test consistency. Let it help you, but make sure that you keep that human element. So the empathy, the humor, the understanding of your members and what they're all about. AI should support your voice, but definitely should not replace it. And it can really help small associations or organizations that have got limited time and capacity. I spent 10 years as a not for profit chief executive, most of that time without someone in a marketing and comms role. And I left that role in 2022, which was literally just when ChatGPT and AI tools were becoming sort of available. I remember doing a few little test runs with it, but it really wasn't in wide use yet. But I think of how long I spent writing media releases and team comms and really long-winded instructions. It would have saved so much time to have AI as a tool, but it's absolutely all about how you use it. Um, so I would recommend, giving it a go using tools like ChatGPT, or Grammarly is a good one. Microsoft's Copilot is good as well. Use those tools to explore some different phrasing, to ask it to match things to your tone. And I'll talk a little bit about how to do that in a minute. And also just to review consistency of tone. Um, and you can try prompting AI to rewrite something in your association style. It can really help with that kind of articulation. But always review and adapt and humanize. Your audience will not connect with automation. It's going to connect with an authentic voice. And you've got to make sure you keep that context at the heart of your message, because my experience with using AI to generate content is it can sometimes just lose the context because it doesn't have all of the information. So it can lose the context, but once you have been presented with whatever it's produced, you sort of can lose the context too. So you have to make sure you know what you want to say and check that AI is capturing that. Um, and if it doesn't sound like something that you would actually say to a member, it's not your voice. So scrap it, start again. So just some, I guess, an idea on how you can use an AI tool for brand voice. So if you have written something, or someone in your team has written something, and you think that perhaps it hasn't quite hit the mark with brand voice, you can use AI to edit your draft to match your brand. So take a document that you think is a great example of your organization's brand voice. It might even be like a foundational document, like your strategic plan, or it might be, you might have a list of your values, or you might have a media release that you've written previously that you think is a really great example of your brand and the tone that you like to use. So put that into a tool like ChatGPT, um, and then you can direct it to match the tone, and then you insert your draft, just copy and paste in your draft, and it will really zhuzh up your draft and it will bring it into line with your brand document or whatever you've given it as context. And you can give it as much context as you like. You can copy and paste in, 5 different documents as an example of your brand voice, and then you can say match the tone for this draft, or you can say, here's a bullet point list of 5 things I want to cover. Write a letter matching the tone that covers these 5 points. And what you get will not be a complete ready to use document, but will be something that you can edit to the standard that you want it to be. So it can be a really good tool for doing that, and can be really good, especially if you've got multiple people that are needing to follow your brand voice guidelines, and you want to just make sure that everything comes into line. So really encourage you to have a go with those tools, but just don't rely on them completely. Make sure your human voice is in there. So just in terms of how you actually what you can do next in terms of actually developing your brand voice. So define it. What are 3 words that describe your association's voice? Document it and write some examples of tone and phrasing, and then deliver it. So embed it in your comms, your events, and your member experiences. Um, Even a one pager for this kind of thing can actually keep your team aligned. Um, and so, how do you get your team and others in your organization across this? So, repetition, repetition, repetition. Um, Share the document, but then take on an active role in actually reviewing all of those touch points and making sure it's on brand. And if it's not, don't be afraid to just tell your team member or whoever it is what needs to be changed and why. With the leadership and strategy consulting that I do, I often find this is where things get a bit unstuck because sometimes leaders can find this type of feedback a bit tricky once they want to pivot, do something a bit different. And if everybody doesn't totally understand that, they can find it a bit tricky to give that kind of feedback. But I think that, if you're responsible for the brand voice of your association, then you have to get comfortable with pulling things into line. Um, just keep it totally professional. It's not personal. It's just you're wanting to make sure that your brand voice is consistent across all channels. So it's just taking them on that journey. So when you're developing that brand voice, give everybody some input. Give them a bit of freedom, but bring them back to that main purpose of your association and why you're here and why brand voice is important. Um, so, just to finish the presentation part of this, your brand voice, it's your association's mana in action. So stay true to your kaupapa, your people, and your purpose. Brand voice, it's not about perfection, it's about authenticity and connection. And when your voice reflects your values, your members will feel that every time they engage with you. Um, yeah, that's the end of the presentation part of the session. Thanks for listening to me. I'm looking forward to diving into some of your questions and challenges that